Hello. Let's see if this works. Hello, Jim. Hello, everybody. Uh, Welcome to the big reveal week. Yay! All right. So I love doing live streams because I can't see people's faces, so it makes it way easier. So I'm going to go and do some little presentation stuff. I'm just going to show you around. It's going to be very light, very fun. Uh, and I will get used to this eventually. Share screen, Chrome tab. Let's do, do I need to move it over there? Just like here. I believe this is right. Perfect. All right. Right. Got it there. Okay, cool. So, all right. So for this week, this is the big reveal week. I'm very, very excited because it's something that I've been working on, well, for a lot longer, but very much more focused in the last 8 months for sure. Very, very heads down. And that would be because I was asked to help out with a initiative or project that was going through the Entertainment Technology Center at USC, at the University of Southern California. And the idea was to create a standard of storytelling or story structure that could be easily transposed and portable and moved from one format to another. So, in other words, like if you write a novel and then it gets transferred into a movie or video game or any sort of other sort of medium, that your intent would go along with it, right? And obviously, the idea would be using dramatica theory and subtext, like eventual evolution of that, to be the thing that's holding all the narrative structure part or the intent, right? Because that's all about intent. Whereas the actual words themselves, like your word file or your final draft file or whatever it is, are just the words. So those kind of lose agency once they leave, because then anybody can modify them. And sure, you could track all the different scenes and stuff like that, but there's something about the author's voice that's getting lost with all the AI stuff recently. And so this was a perfectly timed, especially this week, couldn't be a more perfectly timed project to eventually come out this week. Um, and so I was graciously allowed to talk about it before it was official, although maybe it's official now. Um, and so, yeah, so that's would be what you're seeing here in subtext. So there's a tremendous amount of stuff to go over. The first thing would be, oh, let me just make sure I can, because it's in a different window. Oh, message retracted. Okay. I don't know what Hank was saying. Hank's the one that wrote the white paper, which is super, super smart. Oh, you know what I should do? I should do hold on a second. Let me stop sharing a second. I should probably find a way to do this on the side. I'll come back to that in a second. Let me do narrative first. All right. Yeah. Okay. So then let me go back to Chrome. And let's share this screen right here. The latest. Okay. Excellent. All right. So everybody's seen narrative first. Okay. So this is the blog post I put up last night, which is announcing the universal narrative model, a new era for storytelling. And there are two links in here. One is the white paper, who it looks like Hank is probably in here, but Hank's the one who put together the whole paper. So he was part of the project. So that's him here. So all these super smart words are all from, and he went through and wrote this really amazing paper, an author-centric storytelling framework for generative AI. So if you've been around dramatic theory, you've been around subtext for a long time, you already know like, oh, this is like the perfect thing for generative AI in that it, by definition, extracts the subtext of a story from the actual storytelling. So, and I've had other articles on narrative first where talked about, training models on storytelling will only get you so far because it's all subjective from that point of view. So then all the biases come into play. And then it's kind of unusual as to what it is that you're training because then you're really just training the voices of other people. I guess you're creating a new voice, but it really is just the storytelling layer. Whereas the subtext, and a lot of writers don't even know that that's there, is an objective framework. And the only one that's out there is Dramatica, right? Um, and now the universal narrative model. And I should be super clear that if you go down here, just so you know, for anybody who's like, wait, what do Chris and Melanie think of that? All right. So there you go. All right. So very much involved in all of it. And it's all good. Because really it's just the framework of it. So it's basically just open sourcing the underlying structure that I put together for subtext, kind of open sourcing that so then everybody could come play with it and create their own stuff on top of it, and hopefully, like, if they need help, they can always reach out. But so definitely read through the white paper. So that was the big thing from yesterday. And then the other really fun thing, which I've always wanted to do, now I have an excuse to do it, is the universal narrative model is now on GitHub, right? So if you tap this guy, now you come into here and you'll find a standardized application agnostic JSON schema for structuring narrative elements across storytelling mediums. So um, thankfully, I've been entrusted with taking care of this. And so you can expect the same 2 decades worth of trying to keep Dramatica alive and all the stuff that goes into there to be put into everything into here, um, and to continually add to it, and not so much make it possible for people to add on stuff onto it, like if they had other things that they wanted to do. I think for the most part, unless there's something that becomes really integral, I think for the most part it'll stay relatively similar to what it is now, with maybe affordances for other people that want. But the cool thing is you can just fork it and make your own version and just use this as a dependency in your project. And then whenever we update things, like if I decide to change a term, then that'll get downstream. You'll pick it up and you'll be able to follow that. So if you ever want to know what the latest updates are, and you can see I've been kind of busy in the last day or so, um, just making sure everything looks reasonably good, this would be the place to go. So, and if you're not comfortable with GitHub and you're not really somebody that's into that, the other thing you can do if you just want to keep up with the model is go to up here at the top where it says UNM. You can just tap this and it should take you to the mirror I have here, unm.subtext.app, which is just the specification. So I go through the entire structure of the UNM, and then I just noticed people are leaving comments. So let's see. Can't see your screen, just you talking. Oh no. Jim, we can't see your screen. That's annoying. Hold on. All right. I will get better at that. It's right here to the right of me. I should always check that. Hold on. All right. Let me go back to. Well, where the heck? We need more power to the engines. Hold on. No, I just need to get. I'm so zoom oriented, but I want to make sure this is out to everybody, and then I don't have to worry about uploading it. Where is? Oh, come on. That is obnoxious. Oh, there it is. Okay. So if I do this, and then I look over here to the right, it should pop up. No, but it's gross. Oh. Let me try something. Doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. Let me log out of this one. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna put that there. Alrighty. So then let's share. Oops, nope. Stop sharing. Share screen. Now let's see. If I do this, it's probably way better because it's all in Chrome. Nope. Man, it's slow. Come on. Sorry, just trying to see why this won't share here. Share screen. It looked great last week. Come on. Really? Okay. Let me try. Wait. There's the white paper, folks. In it. The way you did it first was working. Then it stopped when you showed Melanie and Chris's names. Oh, when I scrolled down on the white paper? Cut out right when you showed Chris in the acknowledgement. That's hilarious. All right. Well, it was working. My question though is if I do this and I go back to this thing, Chris has control over it. It looks weird though. It's all squishied, right? And if I do this to fill the whole screen, and I wonder if anybody has any ideas of what to do, because that's annoying. It worked great last week, and I have so much to go over. Hmm. Let's see if there is a button. If I do this, does that change anything? Makes it worse. This way. Make it wider. Oh, man. Hmm. Ooh, there's a bunch of comments. Oh, here we go. While live streaming through a webcam, you can now share your screen. After you've gone live, I did that. I did that. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing, which it worked fine. Yeah, I did all that. I don't know why it does this like squishy thing. Man. Oh. I do this. Does that change anything? When in doubt, restart the stream. I guess so, but then I can't do all this over again. Why can't it just work? Let me just try a couple more things and see if I can get this to work. I wonder if it's this guy. No. Hmm. All right. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Because this. Oh, there are people actually watching. Uh, Minimize interval screen. Tell them no. Nobody knows anything. Lord have mercy. Okay. Stop sharing. Move your image off the screen share. Oh, me personally? Yeah, maybe that's it. I have so much cool stuff to show, and I would love to be able to show it. I want to know why this isn't Chrome. Welcome. Share. Man. Does anybody see that? Oh, there it goes. Okay. It's just really long. Everybody sees that now, though, right? Well, I can see it. Looks good. Okay. All right. That means I got to make sure. Okay, I get it now. Hold on. Just have to make sure I'm in the right. Okay. Oh man, what a week. Okay, there's that. This guy. Share. This guy. Okay. It just takes a second for it to kick in. Do I go back here? Is that what clicks it on? Okay, there we go. Alrighty. So let's see if we can get this going. All right, so UNM. So now I'm gonna try and share. Stop sharing. Share the UNM, which is right here. Share. Then if I go back here, that should pop up, and then I can start talking about it any second now. That's good. Getting it, getting it. Now, hopefully, this won't go away. Alrighty. Okay, so this is unm.subtext.app, and this is going to, sorry, I gotta get back into it. This is going to be a mirror of the entire specification of the GitHub repo. So, again, because I think maybe all of this was well, no, I'll just leave it. Off of Narrative First, there's a blog post that's up today that has a link to this, and then also the GitHub repo, which is the entire thing. All right, so to get back into the model here. Okay, so the big things it does is it's about the subtext and the storytelling and makes that all part of the actual object. So you have your narrative object here. So I'll just briefly go through this, and there'll be lots more in-depth stuff on the GitHub repo. Plus, I'm going to do a complete example. So I will have one that's got everything that you've ever wanted. And one will be dopamine aligned, and one will be serotonin aligned. I know the serotonin one I'm gonna do in Nora, that one because I love that film. And then I'll probably do Shawshank Redemption just because I have so much information on it. So I know that's my Star Wars, but, it's the best example of all that, and it will bring up a lot of points that I think people will appreciate. Alrighty. So the overall structure of the universal narrative model is, um, you got your sort of meta stuff on top, and then narrative. So every narrative is a complete story form from Dramatica Theory, and then updated with all the subtext stuff. So it's like you can have multiple narratives within a single work. So your story is like your big thing, and then you might have several different narratives that you go through several different story forms. And I try to start putting some examples in here because I'm going to treat this kind of also like an educational resource. So when people come in and they see it and they're like, well, what is the difference between this and Save the Cat or Hero's Journey or any of this other stuff that I've ever learned? Like what I was trying to get to in the beginning is those are all very subjective in that it's up to the point of view or the bias of the person appreciating the narrative, whether or not it's fulfilling the different requirements. And even those requirements are really wishy-washy, like you can move things in and out of place so that time has no meaning. So the thing that separates out Dramatica theory and subtext, and now the universal narrative model, is the subtext layer of it is very objective, meaning it only works by virtue of how the individual parts are related to one another, not somebody else's viewpoint on it or their opinion on it. So only a certain kind of arrangement of different elements will work and create a complete story form. Um, and that's what all holds together. So something like Empire Strikes Back has the two complete story forms. Anything Lawrence Kasdan writes has at least two story forms. So uh, the Luke Yoda sort of thing. You mean they even split off and do their thing, and then the Han Leia. Those are both two full complete story forms that work on their own and have some overlapping storytelling. And then Barbie, I thought it'd be good to have a good, more recent one, which is the Barbie Ken story form. Usually, if you look towards the key relationships in a story, if those relationships are servicing other thematic material, then they will usually have their own story form. If not a complete story form, at least like a sub story form. So with Barbie, you have her and Ken, and then the other one is with Gloria, the human person. But most of them just have a single narrative, and you'll be totally fine doing that. And then within the narrative, if you are familiar with subtext, then you know all these look super familiar. So perspectives are something that I've wanted to do for a really long time, but was super necessary now is so that you can hand off those through lines from one uh, character to another. And then the other parts, the players, those are just all the objective story players, like your protagonist and your antagonist. Story points are the spatial considerations of the story form. So uh, the different motivations, the different where the source of conflict is coming from. And then story beats are the temporal what happens in each act, in each scene or whatever you want to call it. And then dynamics are the things that kind of convey the message that the author is trying to say with their story. And so there's a really nice, it's in the white paper, but there's a really nice, you do dynamics times the story points, and then that's how you get the order of the story beats. That's how that works. So I love being able to see this like just split out here. And then you can go through and read up on those. Or if you use subtext, you already know pretty much how all this works. And then the storytelling is the stuff on top. So that's how it actually gets conveyed. Overviews are kind of like arcs and synopses. In subtext, I don't use any of the overview stuff for any sort of generative or anything like that because it's really just for the author. It's not trying to figure out what it is that's going on. Your log line and all that kind of stuff fits in there. And then moments, those are what I most people would probably refer to those as scenes, but I've always called them moments because they really aren't scenes and they aren't sequences and they aren't acts. This is exactly how subtext is set up. So if you ever wanted to know how subtext was set up, this is definitely it. Okay, so yeah, perspectives. So perspectives are a way to hand off main character through line, um, objective story through line, and catalyst provocateur or relationship story through line. And I thought I had an example here. Not do it here. Yeah. So in perspectives, when it comes to examples, I put in the Christmas Carol one because that's like the easiest one. So all the ghosts have the same thematic impact, but they're handing off the perspective. So in this model, you would have a perspective for Marley, a perspective for the ghost of Christmas past, a perspective for present, and a perspective for future. So they all have their own perspective object. And then when you go to figure out those story points or story beats, you attach them to these perspectives. That's all you're doing in subtext. So that, like, for instance, here's an example of what this looks like. And I put this in, I'm super happy about this, just to get across the point that these are not your like first person, third person sort of idea, but more about um, the author's structural point of view, where they're positioning all the conflict in the narrative. So right now, it just has this I, which I can't imagine there's a different term for main character, but maybe there is. Uh, but for the catalyst provocateur, which is what subtext in the universal narrative model now calls the obstacle character, you could just put you, and this is how it can be transferable from subtext to Dramatica with no problem. So the whole point of doing all the terminology stuff is to get it to a place where it's almost like application agnostic, and worked really hard in terms of training with the AI stuff for the last like 3 years to really find out what are the really quick, easy triggers that not only people can read and instantly know, they don't have to look at domain and think, what the heck is domain? Um, and that it's really focused on the source of conflict that's coming through the narrative, but getting it to a point where then that can be transferred from one concept of it to another. So for instance, the original Dramatica theory, it was the obstacle character, and the reason for that is their perspective is an obstacle to the main character kind of just doing things the way that they've always done it. Like they have the whole set of justifications, and then all of a sudden there's this point of view that they can't get around. That was the original intent of it, and then they have to deal with it. I personally think that's the best. Well, until now. And then it went to impact character, and then it went to influence character. And now the problem with then, and I'm sure eventually you'll be able to train this and it'll be super easy. But for right now, um, getting AI to understand the fact that obstacle character is not always the antagonist of a story, just like with real people, is really challenging. So having catalyst provocateur not only provokes more thought in a meta sense, but it literally catalyzes growth in the main character and also provokes, whether intentionally or unintentionally. So that's where that's coming from. And you'll be able to do like you and I and we and they for the different through lines there. And what'll be great is then it's not, with like Dramatica forever, it was this like hidden file format. You could never look inside and see what everything was about. So this is something that's easily transferable, can last forever. Text will be here forever. Um, and then you'll just be able to update it with whatever sort of new technologies come out. Players. All right. So then players are just strictly objective story through line players. So you'll see it says, you have to have an objective story player. So this would be an example of what it would be like to attach a player to a single perspective. And like I said, you can have just like you can have handoff main characters, like Inside Out 2 has handoff main characters. Just like you can have handoff obstacle characters like Christmas Carol. Just like you can have handoff relationship story, which is escaping me for the moment. But also objective story through line. You could conceivably hand them off. I've seen people do it before where if they have like an ensemble story, like Love Actually or Four Weddings and a Funeral, that kind of thing, where all the couples are kind of going through the same thematic material. They just have a different version of what their version of that looks like. Then you might have three or four different perspectives, and some players might be a part of more than one. So that's why you could do multiples in here. Um, and you'll see that reflected in subtext with the new perspective thing where you can attach a story point to more than one perspective, which is different than just the single perspective by itself. So really super complex, but only in so much as to make it possible for everybody to do every single kind of story that they've ever wanted to do. And so there's the ID stuff, which is basic stuff. Name, role is the objective story function, their job or their whatever it is that they're in there. The visual and the audio stuff will make much more sense, hopefully by the end of this presentation. Bio is just like a catch-all. You can put all the backstory stuff in there. Storytelling, the way that I use it in subtext is, and maybe I should bring up this. Let's show. Actually, let me go through I'll keep going through this just because it takes forever to switch, and then I'll show what it looks like in subtext. Because a lot of this has been abstracted away from subtext so that you could take advantage of it, use it with whatever it is that you want to do. So, storytelling, I do a combination of all these motivations in relation to the story goal. So, if you've ever read any of my articles in terms of figuring out who the protagonist and antagonist of a story is, um, you have the not inciting incident, the first story driver, which kicks off the objective story through line, and then that creates a goal that will resolve the conflict. And then the protagonist is the one pursuing that, and the antagonist is the one preventing it. So, because of uh, that, all the other objective story players in that perspective are also in relation to that goal. So, support, oppose, all those different motivations like temptation and conscience. You could conceivably have them just be this random thing, but I've found, practically speaking, if you always relate it to the goal, that always keeps them tied into it, um, and really pulls everything together. So when you go to mix all your different motivations and subtext, it just does it in context of the goal. I mean, this is a simple example. It's not really very good in here, but that's the idea when you add in all those different elements, those different motivations, and then you mix them together. Oh, put these all together in terms of the goal. That's what is happening there, which really is helpful then down the road when you are generating scenes or anything. Um, it doesn't have to interpret all of what this means. It has a really strong understanding of how that player functions in the story. And it's all related to the goal. And then you could put all, their how they dress and what on top of it, because that's non-essential stuff that you could strip away and the story would still make sense. That's the other thing. You could also, when you think of storytelling on top of subtext, all of the storytelling is all the stuff you can strip away and the story will still hold its meaning. It might not be very interesting, but That's the big difference there. So those are perspectives, and I'll just keep flipping back now that I got a rhythm here. All right. So those are perspectives, story points. So then story points again are your, if you're from Dramatica, domain, concern, issue, if you're straight up new universal narrative model, which is a lot more of a mouthful. UNM is form, field, facet, and force, four Fs. And that's because I really wanted to get across the point, and this is an article I just put up on Narrative First, that yes, they have different names, but they really are all the same thing. They're just different scopes, different sizes, and they're all looking for the source of conflict. So I'm actually really quite, and I will say, because anytime I make changes, I've always made changes. Anytime I make changes, I feel like I'm doing the wrong thing. This one, uh, my latest stuff with Muse in terms of figuring out story forms and stuff like that have been phenomenal to the point where it's like single turn can get the entire story form just off of a log line, which is really encouraging because that has everything to do with the terminology changes and really honing that into a place where it's really clear what change resolve doesn't really work. And maybe I'll do one that's just really all about the terminology, although I think I might have did that last week. Okay. So here you'll see the so for story points, you have your appreciation of the method of conflict. So that's what you're seeing here. This is the thing that's actually generating the conflict. This is the illustration of it. Um, in Dramatica, you'd probably call this a gist, but that's just the shortcut illustration of rationalization. And then this is just typical stuff. Storytelling would be all the actual like explanation of how that shows up in the story. And then a summary is just that. And again, the perspective, which will link back to a main character perspective in this, I assume, because this is probably a main character story point. All story points look like that. And then story beats are a little bit more complex in that, yes, you have the appreciation and yes, you have the method, but you also have the sequence of it. So whether or not it's 1, 2, 3, 4 for the transits, 1 through 16 for the progressions, or 1 through 64 for the events, that will help you pinpoint exactly where it is. And then the rest is the same. These thematic tones are really deep cut from subtext. And this would be a thing where when you justify the story, it goes through and essentially tags and works through some really key elements of a story and mixes them up as it goes through. So these are, you probably want to learn more about that if you want those. And then the perspective again for the story beat. So those are story beats and story points. And now dynamics. So these are the top higher level things that will appear like they're more binary in nature because they usually just have two choices, but really there are vectors, there are directions. So these are different. They'll have dynamic, they'll have a vector. They're not attached to a perspective because they're all about the story form itself. So they get a little more wishy-washy in this area just because it's harder to see what did they actually attach to. But this would be where you would have your story outcome. Um, and these shift depending on whether or not, it's more towards dopamine or more serotonin aligned, which I know I talked about last week. So that's all the subtext. That's it. But there's a lot that goes into that. Um, and no questions. I've never seen tones before. It's all in the data, baby. Yeah, it's in the guide. If you go into the guide and you look at story beats, you will see it explained. And then also, it's at the very bottom of every story beat. You'll see it listed out. Situation. These will be a little bit different. No, no, they should say situation. Um, these are yeah. And so it's like okay, sure, you have this last transit. So this is like the last act of Michael, and he can't escape his past, which is great. Even that's enough. And then as we go down these tones, they get quieter and quieter in terms of importance. I know there's no real order here listed in the object, but that's how it works in subtext. where this would be the way it gets abstracted into it, so it appears as a situation. The fact that he can't escape his past, he ends up in the same place that he was 50 years ago or something. So then it's like that's how that's getting abstracted out. And then space and time here, power is when you work through a dramatic circuit at the end, what is coming out of that is propelling it into the next consideration. So this would be where all that power comes through. And then the temporal ones are just fancy ways of describing growth, but transcendence, which is usually like what you find here in the end. And I could go into those in more detail probably in a different one. All right. Julio. Okay. Dynamics. Okay. And then the more storytelling stuff, this is pretty basic. I probably won't spend too much time on this, but they're like character arc, log line, genre dynamics, that kind of stuff. Um, anything that you want to keep track of that's more storytelling in nature. And then moments. Okay, so then these are most people will probably think of these as scenes, but I don't think that's very accurate. So that's why I call them moments, because you could have a really big moment, you could have a really small moment. Um, and some of these will make much more sense in a little bit. But essentially, you have the same sort of summary and the synopsis of what the moment is like. And you'll see a bunch of others. So you'll see the alternative here. It says now we're talking storytelling. So whereas the perspectives, which were the lowest level of the subtext, maybe it's the highest level of subtext, were author structural POV. Now we're getting more to what most people think of when they think of perspective, like third person limited, second person, first person, whatever that kind of stuff is. And this is just an indication that that's how it's going to be exposed in the story. These other things I'll probably talk about in a bit here. And then for every moment, you just have an array of story beats. That is the sequence of those story beats, how they go in order. And then you can mix and match them and do it that way. But this is how a moment holds the story beats, and they can be from any through line, right? Any perspective. So you see there's no indication of through line here because we're getting further and further away from the original author's intent and getting more into storytelling. So you're going to start to lose the perspective and they all get kind of blended together to then get your synopsis of what that would look like. And then, you just have one moment after the next. And actually, I can see something that's already missing here, which is like a sequence on the moments because there's no inherent order there. All right. Coolio. So that is the universal narrative model. One thing you'll know that is currently left out is the actual justification process, which is how you do that multiplication of dynamics times story points into story beats. I have some information here that kind of explains the difference between a relinquished resolve and a maintained resolve and the kind of impact that has on the order of events. And then also showing how those dynamics hook into story points where, when it comes to the pivotal elements of a narrative, if the story is about abandoning or letting go of a former way of going about resolving inequities, then the story will focus and elevate problem and solution. Whereas if it's about maintaining that perspective, it's maintained when you compare the end to the beginning, then the focus will be on the focus and direction because it'll be much more about the surface level stuff that's being taken care of. All right, you see Dramatica's there, subtext, look, they're buddies. Isn't that fun? And then of course a link to the whole GitHub repo if you want to do that. But this is really where most authors would spend their time is here in this area if they wanted to get up to date on things. All right, so that's the universal narrative model, and I did the other thing, and I have some time left, so let's have fun now. Okay, so part of the project was showing how how you could move it from one form to another. Now, I'm not going to show you the thing because there's all kinds of stuff behind that. But what I did do is I went into, I did not sharing the right screen. Hold on a second. Share. Um, should be this one, right? Yeah. So I prepared ahead of time, and this is really fun. So the whole point of doing this whole UNM thing is to really unlock a whole bunch of possibilities that just weren't available before. Oh, I want to make sure it's coming through. Come on, show up. There it goes. Okay. Um, so this is a look at what this is like. Oh, I have to tease that 1 second. I do have to do the API thing really fast. Hold on 1 sec. Uh, if you go into the guide, second, share the guide, introduction. There it is. All right. All right. So here we go. And you'll notice it. Oh, let me wait until it pops up here. My ears are perked up. API. um, yeah. So if you'll notice, this guide has gotten 5,000% better since maybe 8 months ago. In that I really took it really seriously, and not that it wasn't serious before, but really put a lot of effort into making sure everything is all super clear. And there is likely a giant book that's in here somehow. I do have one user who's very graciously puts it together as a PDF. He tries to keep up. I'm sure it's a huge nightmare because I keep adding things. And I'm hoping after this week I'll be able to start making that available for those people that like to read it in a PDF form or a book form. Um, so yeah, and this would be, yeah, like if you wanted to do the whole story beats thing and you wanted to see those thematic tones, that would be down here, these thematic cycles. So it'll go through and yeah, you'll see situation, potential, expression. That would be another combination. So they kind of are like um, slot machines that have four options, and so they all kind of cycle through that just to make sure. I mean, they are for a different reason. They're not there to make sure, but what happens is then every beat doesn't always become an action. Or if you've ever read the story where, or if you read a story where it says people arguing with each other, like so everything is a justification after a justification after, and it gets really monotonous. That's not why it does it, but it is what alleviates that issue. Is the fact that all these beats will be out of sync and kind of do their own thing on there. So this would be where you would find that. But I will say, does that mean we'll get to download the JSON archive in Subtext? I mean, no. If you want story forms from subtags, I would say, yeah, you could use that. Um, like I said at the top, I will still do um, the two big examples like Shawshank and Nora, but I would say that's probably like a separate thing, like for the different story forms. Just so you know, Subtext has its own sort of thing, and then if you are inspired to create your own applications or your own sort of things that, or even your own stories that then you want to build on top of into other genres or other mediums, then you would be able to use that. But yeah, I probably won't give away everything. I don't know if that makes a lot of business sense. All right, so at least for now. So then, guide subtext. Okay, so the API, that's what I wanted to do right now, is so this I'm super excited about, which I didn't realize was going to be part of what I was doing, but here we go. Um, so these are the APIs that I'm opening up in the very beginning. Um, story forms, evaluation, story beats, and narrative sync. And they're really more about like, I mean, probably this one is more if you want to take what's you have done in subtext and bring it out into something else. You know, like let's say somebody else creates this amazing application that actually does storytelling really well and likes uh, subtext slash dramatica theory, but doesn't like to use all the stuff that I use. So then you can transport it back and forth, assuming they adopt the UNM standard, which is why it's really cool that it's got the backing of something other than just me, so that you'll feel like, okay, cool, I can do this, and we can transport it back and forth. Um, so this one is pretty much just if you would want your story form, right? So you'll be able to come in here and grab what it is that you've written, and then that object that I've shown you. These need to be updated a little bit because of last minute changes, but the idea is that then you would be able to download in the same way anything that you write, you can download the whole thing. I'm just giving it to you in this form so that you can do whatever the heck you want to with it. You might even just like drop this into your favorite LLM and figure out what you want to do off of it, right? No issue with that whatsoever. So it's just a convenient way to, you can download the PDF, you can download the Markdown, or you can download this huge giant object and you can do whatever you want to with it. Oh, cool. Okay. These will be mostly get rather than post. Yes. If you can bring it back, then that's post. Yeah. It's not so much. I mean, there are the posts, which would be, I'll get to in a second. Um, but these are, for the most part, well, no, I think the way I have it set up is for posts, only because the way that I'm setting up your, I mean, maybe I should do a separate one that's all about the technicalities of the API just to get into it. But the idea is, you have your own user ID, you have your API key, and then also the uh, ID that's associated with the structure. That weird garble goody gook thing that's at the top. That's what this sort of thing looks like. That'll be what you post up, and then that's what you get back. Um, so, oh yeah, I'll just stick to the basics right now, just because there's a lot that I want to go over. So yeah, this would be a way to get all your stuff out of Subtext. And then, okay, so these are the fun ones. So evaluations are, in Subtext where you can go through and you can write up a version of disbelief, or you can, do the storytelling on top of the methods of conflict. So what's fun with this one is you can just post the storytelling that you have in there, right? And then also identify what's the method of conflict that you want to compare it against. And then based on all the stuff that I do in the background, which is all the fine tuning of stuff, making sure these are like really clearly sources of conflict, that they're not just like, I'm disbelieving things, that kind of stuff. Then you get back, some sort of numerical score, and then you're free to judge, what, oh, if it's 70% better, yeah, that's great. Maybe I need to like work on a different way. And then that way you can leverage all of the fine tuning and evaluations, the objective evaluations that we do in the background, as far as like all these different methods of conflict and how they work in story without actually doing the story. It's just how the subtext of it works. Then you can just pop into that, grab whatever you want, whichever will work for you. And is this a good version of it? Okay, cool. That one works. This one works. And then it's just a really simple API thing that'll, give you weak, strong, complete denial. And these are based on what I found to be the scores, whether or not I deny it versus make it more positive. So this would be when I go through and really check whenever there's like a new illustration that the AI invents like a different version of disbelief, then I have to check it and see like, oh, does that really what it is supposed to be or actuality? Um, Back in the day, if it was physics, that would be a huge issue because it would always be literally physics as opposed to activities. So that's what this endpoint is all about. So you can measure everything. Oh, who gets access to the API? Pro users, or is it a different subscription model? Okay, so for right now, just as I get everything laid out and stuff. It's just for Infinite users, just by virtue of the fact of all the stuff that's in there. My plan is to open it up to Pro users and probably Basic as well, but to make it, as opposed to a monthly thing, um, it's a metered thing, so it's really just based on usage. So then, therefore, once I get that, the reason why I'm doing the Infinite now is because I can put this out now and start working on it, and then figure out how to do the metered stuff, and then that way everybody can have access to it. I was also flirting with the idea of doing a couple free ones. I don't know what those would be. Probably the story form one, because obviously if you stop subscribing, you should still be able to get your story form. Um, Claude Code separates out API charges from Claude. Yeah, like that kind of idea. I've been thinking about it for a while, but I think it makes a lot of sense to do it here for the API for sure. And then that way, assuming no fraud is involved, I will be okay with people doing what it is that they do. I'm basically just trying to make it so like it's not just me that does everything, but that everybody else can do whatever. Okay. So that is that. And the specifics of that I'll get worked out. But my hope is like quarter two, which is coming up pretty quickly, to have that for everybody. Um okay, so then that's the evaluations. And then story beats. Right now, I just have one in the story beats section, which is story beat completion. And this does is it'll look at a quad of items, or it'll look at the beat. I'm sorry. Oh, story beats fulfilled. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Storytelling. Right. Oh, this example is really bad, but I should probably put a better one in here. The idea is that let's say you have a progression and there's like four events underneath it. You send up just the storytelling and you measure it against this beat, and it'll tell you if the whole progression has been told. So if you remember the whole John Dusenberry thing where you turn the quad on its side, the pinball thing where it comes in and then it kind of bounces back and forth between story beats of those events and then comes out the bottom through the one. It's that idea so that you're not like strictly linear, but it's more of a gestalt of the whole thing, whether or not all those beats have been fulfilled. And then if not, then you get an explanation as to why. So, the submitted story. So for here, Ophelia, eager to mend the ongoing familial tensions that her presence exasperates, decides to bake cookies as a peace offering. And then I might send that up. Let's say I have some kind of application where I want to see is that enough to tell the progression? And then this matches the progression that matches the ID that I have in the story beat for my story form. Then it will look at that and go, well, assuming, and this is one that there wasn't enough in here, it says, well, it only addresses the initial setup of child B1. So it's just looking at that first one, which might be desire or something, where Ophelia decides to bake cookies as a peace offering to mend familial tensions. However, it does not delve into the aftermath of her mistake, which is probably a fact, the reactions of other family members, cause, and then deeper tensions that arise as a result. So if you know anything about dramatica theory, you can see that this is a quad of elements, probably cause, effect, process, and result. None of the other child beats are present as there's no explanation of trust testing. Oh, maybe those are them, or arguments over the cause of the trouble. Additionally, it's cause, effect, trust, and test. That's what it is. Additionally, the last child beat, which is the most important if you are trying to move on from one moment to the next, is entirely absent, meaning the scene does not turn or reach a definitive conclusion. The storytelling is incomplete and fails to fulfill the parent's beats. And then you can do with that whatever you want, So you could analyze whatever kind of story you're going and see if there's enough in there to check it, and then get a programmatic way of have it coming back to you in a way that you can tell whether or not you can move on to the next. So that one's super cool. And then the last one is a last minute addition. And if you notice in Subtext, I kind of redid the brainstorm AI. I just called it narrative sync instead because it was really clear to me as I was going through it and working through all the APIs and putting this all together that it's really about aligning whatever sort of story idea you have with the story form. So if you send in, it'll work exactly like the narrative sync, but you can just access it from outside. Meaning you could throw in an idea like that one that I just had for Ophelia. Let's see, so she's eager to mend the ongoing family tensions. And then trust. So I might say like, oh, well, Ophelia trusts that she's making cookies, which is a really horrible story beat. You would send that to Subtext to the narrative sync. It would do that and it would be like, that's a horrible way of writing trust as a motivation or a driving force. Here's a way to actually make it problematic. So, in other words, the way that she is baking the cookies, she brings in two or three different other people to help her to kind of build up their trust and like gives them an opportunity to decide how much sugar goes into it. And then that creates, because she was driven to trust, to kind of like get across the fact that she's this great person, that is what's causing conflict. So every story beat should have that. So then that'll be something that you'll be able to do with narrative sync for both story points and story beats. That will probably be the one that most people use. So instead of just getting a score that you really, you could do something with if you wanted to, then you actually get the storytelling back. Um, and then that'll help things out. And that's the API. Just really quick. Ooh, have the quads and other dramatic things kind of disappeared from Subtext? No, they're there. In fact, recently Muse has been drawing quads, which has been fun, a fun, unexpected occurrence. But yeah, if I went back into uh, Subtext here, do this one. Yeah, if I was to do let's do internal processing. So they have the new terms, which are, these are the updated terms, like I said, which do an insanely better job of getting across the idea of it's much easier, even if you don't know Dramatica theory, it's much easier for a AI interface to be able to talk to you about what this is about when it knows exactly what this means, as opposed to just psychology. And then psychology and mind get all kind of jacked up and don't quite mean the same thing. But yes, the quads are here for sure, although you'll notice these are a bit more detailed oriented in the fact that you can see the sliding scale that happens on each. So that, you can have too much being and not enough being, and that's different from being itself. So you have this huge, nice long this just gets across the idea that it's a sliding scale and it's not just these boxes that you have to fit into. So it's my hope that that becomes a little more uh, oh, black screen. Oh, it does say black screen. Oh, weird. Okay, hold on, sorry about that. Let's see if this pops up. That's the dumbest thing. So I have to sit here and wait for it to pop up and then I can go back. All right, sorry about that. As soon as you started showing subtext. Okay. I will eventually get into that. So yeah, I was just showing, I brought up, show you where I got to this. I just came in here into the search and I just did internal processing, classifying problems and inequity through the lens of an internal process of thinking. So, oh, and I should also mention too, these aren't straight up definitions out of Dramatica. These are well thought out, very, is it going to go over? Very well thought out, very dynamic not only the explanation definitions, but also the synonyms that are involved. Um, okay. So then, oh, so I was just showing this for internal processing. You were asking about the quads, Mike, was that these are now on the sliding scale. So you have too much being, and then you might have a lack of being, but that's different from being itself. So there's this really nice sliding scale here. Kind of, it's still the quad structure, but it's informing visually that it's not these like hard and fast squares that might uh, lend to some confusion as we go through some of these things. But yeah, that's the quad structure there. Okay, cool. Yeah. All right. Somebody's texting me. Let's make sure. Oh, okay, good. All right. So let's go back into here. I'm there. Okay. So we got all that done. Internal processing. All right. Let's do the fun stuff. Okay. So this is my last big reveal for tomorrow, which is really, really fun. Um, there is a brand new way to write stories. I don't know if I have the energy for hype right now, but I'll just talk about it then. So, by means of example, because I can't use the one that's actually in there, what I did is I went into story starters here, and I just did this morning. And if you're unaware, Muse will go through and every night it puts together a story just based on a story form. It gets a story form, comes up with a genre, comes up with a log line, and then figures out all four through lines. These are kind of like story starters, just so people can see, what it can do and kind of kick off the idea of like, oh, this is how you can build stories. Like this one is about a wizard that builds a B&B in his castle, and then goblins come in and try and take over. So there's a lot in here. It's been doing this for weeks now. So you have Camp Fun, which is a horror slasher horror film. You have Violet Night, which is superhero action. We've got some dark erotic romance for those of you that appreciate that. Threads of Redemption for those of you who are more drama. But anyways, Monsters in the Potty. I thought this was a great image that it came up with. So, what's really fun is you can now take these and you can essentially play them. These are almost like interactive choose your own adventures that you can actually play. So, what I did is I took Pluck of Destiny, which is in a kingdom clucked up by giant poultry, how can a shrinking knight rise to the challenge? Sir Aldrich never met a boast he didn't love until the fateful disastrous curse sends him to shrink smaller with every pompous brag. Now, this too proud knight must set out on the oddest quest imaginable, protecting his realm from an invasion of rampaging giant chickens with world conquering plans. Joined by Merlinus, a wizard whose anxiety rivals his brilliance and who faints at the mere sight of feathers, Aldrich embarks on a journey that's absurd, enchanting, and hilariously perilous. Together, they stumble through ridiculous battles, chicken sized disasters, and revelation after humbling revelation, forming endearing friendship and learning that true bravery isn't boastful swagger, but gentle humility. But can Aldrich overcome his pride long enough to break the curse, save the kingdom, and finally, at least literally, grow into the knight he dreams of becoming? Feathers fly, dangers multiply, and an extraordinary destiny awaits as each laugh and lesson takes them closer to a remarkable truth. All right, so that's the Cluck of Destiny. So to save time, I prepared this beforehand, but I started with that story and then it copied it over, and it's really just the four through lines, and that's it. So if I opened it up, this will show you what it does. All right. Any day now. Okay. So, like I said, in the developing thing, all it did was it has the original log line. So you'll see like this is the original version before it made the story starter, which is an overly confident knight is text to progressively shrink in size each time he boasts, forcing him to team up with the kingdom's most timid wizard and accept that true bravery is knowing your limits. And you can see already it was much more rich thematically as it created catalyst character, relationship story, all that kind of stuff. So what it did is it took that and blew that out into the four through lines, right? So this is the surface storytelling. That's what you're seeing on the story starter. It's the same exact thing I just read. And that is a blending of all this narrative structure underneath. This is a mistake. Sorry about this obstacle character thing starting showing up, but it should just be these four, which is about the Shrinking Knight's quest. That's the plot. Then we have Sir Aldrich, who's about, overly boasting and getting smaller and smaller. Then we have Merlinus, the Merlin character, who's very timid, and then their friendship and the relationship story through line. Mix all that together, and you get this story. And so this isn't the next couple steps I just did manually. I could see this being automatic, but just for right now, for the sake of time, if I attached and I said, I just want to look at this perspective for the Shrinking Knight quest, then I went through and I had it generate plot and players for that objective story. So not only did it come up with the plot, so it has a goal here, which is learning his true worth through timid wizard guidance, very specific. Not only did it figure out the consequence, which is conceiving, but it also figured out the initial story driver. The story erupts when the overly confident knight boasts during an adventure and is suddenly cursed. He begins shrinking with every boast. This irreversible act of arrogance plunges the entire kingdom into chaos. Okay. And that's rejection and then acceptance. In the climactic final scene, so this would be the concluding story driver. So it figured out this is what starts it, which is rejecting, which is basically rejecting his relentless inflated display of pride. It's pretty close. I might massage that a little bit. But then at the end, the other side of the coin to rejection is acceptance. So in the end, he accepts his new form, and then that's how he's able to save the kingdom. So that's the basic general plot of it, and then the outcome of it here just tells you that it all ended up in success, I believe. Yeah. So I had that generate that just through the generating plot and players. Let's see. You just got back. That's so great. You don't instinctively make hard oppositions. Good. Cool. Yeah. Um, so I did the plot there, blended that all in there to the storytelling, and then also it generated a cast of players who are all the Dramatica archetype characters. So you'll have your protagonist here, which would be the same thing as the main character. So Aldrich uh, created the role, his appearance, his voice, how it would actually sound, and then a short little bio. Then this was the thing I was saying where his role as the protagonist is intricately tied to this story goal of learning the futility of resistance. That's the whole narrative structure. Is the author, in this case Muse, has decided, all right, this story is going to be about learning. I want the main character to learn, and not in the sense of you should learn something, a different way to do it, but the actual act of learning is what's problematic and what you can actually work through. So then as a protagonist, there's those motivations of pursuit and consider. So giving chase and thinking something through, those are illustrations of these motivations that are then put in context of the story goal to get a really nice idea of who Sir Aldrich will be in the story. So you kind of see, if you think way back when to the UNM object, you can see what's actually happening here are these different elements. And then, Merlin is the reason character, uh, the guardian, the antagonist, skeptic, and sidekick. And I can tell, this is interesting. So the main character pivotal is rejection, and the solution is acceptance. I might as well fix that. And this is probably because of terminology changes. But in addition to these protagonist elements, he should have rejection because that's what ties him. character wise, and then also plot wise together. Being ashamed. All right. I actually kind of like that. So then now I'll just copy this easy. Not good. So then I can just reblend this together and it'll put these three in context of the story goal. Yeah. Ultimately, his rejection of his former humors becomes a key to his growth as he learns to. This isn't what I wanted to show, but let's see. Driven by being ashamed of his diminishing size, he continually tries to. Um, I don't want to say control. Driven by being ashamed, continually pushes people away. All right. So that would be a way to illustrate rejection like that. And this will really help later when we get to the thing I want to show. And then Merlinus, who I believe is the catalyst character, he should have acceptance. So then that ties him into both plot and character. Not accepting a group? Oh, I kind of like that too. These are good first ones. So the idea being that it's not rejecting, but it's like, I'm not going to accept nothing but the very best. Uh, I would say Merlin's journey is one of choosing to accept um, slackers. Slacking. Mm, those who don't work as a team. Okay. His internal conflict amplifies his. Yeah, I'll get rid of this stuff. Okay. So then those elements are in there, and I have a really good understanding of who he is and how all the players are. So once I have all of that, make sure I didn't lose anybody. Cool. So this is the fun part. All right. Well, from here, I went and I did the objective story beats. I actually did them for the entire story. I just did this morning, by the way. I went through and just did like beat out the act turns and all that kind of stuff. And then once I realized that was taking too long, I just focused on the first act. So here you'll see I took the first act, which is all about doing, and in this, his obsession with storytelling alienates his closest allies. So that's kind of like the point of the first act is him doing all this stuff is going to alienate everybody and create all kinds of conflict. And then that breaks down into some progressions, which will have thematic instances of fate, like fate pops in, prediction, interdiction, and destiny. And then in those, I broke those down into further into the events. So it's a lot to go through. And yes, I could probably automate a lot of this stuff, although where's the fun in that? And it's also not perfect, so there's sometimes when you have to adjust things. But anyways, once you have this, and then I did Sir Aldrich, his main character, did the same thing just for the first act. I did something for Merlinus, got his like first progression and the kind of stuff that he's working through. And then I did their relationship story. Then I went to plotting and I created two moments that I thought were good. The first one would be Cluck Cluck Goose, and that's when they first go into the forest. So it's like a big opening scene, opening sequence of the movie, or yeah, imagine it's a movie. And he's with his party, and they run into a bunch of chickens, and then they get into some combat there. And then later, after it all kind of fails, then there's a grand feast that Merlin sets up in the castle, where he kind of does his catalyst provocateur obstacle character thing, kind of showing him, hey, you're you're kind of being too boastful, that kind of thing. So I just have a basic idea of that. And what I did um, is I just put in the events of those two different sets. So here you can see in Cluck Cluck Goose, I've got a bunch of objective story events and main character events. And then I did the same thing in the next one where it went through and put in obstacle character and main character for the second part. And what I did here is I took advantage of Weave here. So Weave, if you have a Pro or an Infinite, what it'll do is I can just drop in all the different events. I hit Weave, and then it will intelligently put them in the right order that feels the best. Because this is usually where people check out when it comes to subtext, because they did all this work, and then when it comes to weaving, they're like, "Oh, this is too much." What's really nice is with AI, this doesn't take away any of your agency because you can still move stuff around, but it will go through and weave everything together. So I did that for both scenes, and then I also created a setting, so just kind of like where it takes place and who's there and what's going on. And then the timing part of it is you'll want to set up more so like not like the time of day, but when it takes